The fabric of her gown, an emerald silk she had saved for 3 months to afford, felt like a lie against her skin. It was a costume for a life she was supposed to be living, a life that had been promised and then meticulously stolen, thread by thread. Annalise Thorne stood in the marble-floored service corridor of the Obsidian Tower, the air thick with the smell of industrial cleaner and regret. She could hear the faint, muffled thrum of the orchestra on the other side of the gilded doors. She could hear the murmur of 1,000 voices, a river of champagne-fueled congratulations flowing toward one man. Marcus. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," the event staffer, a boy no older than 20 with a flush of nervous importance on his cheeks, said again. He clutched his clipboard like a shield. Mr. Vance's instructions were very specific. He requested you use the back entrance. Annalise looked from the boy's earnest, apologetic face to the door marked Staff Only, then back to the grand archway that led to the gala. Her gala, her building. From the foundational schematics to the bespoke light fixtures that now cast a warm, celebratory glow over people who would never know her name, this tower was a cathedral built of her own sleepless nights. It was her soul rendered in steel and glass. She did not argue. She had learned long ago that arguing was a currency she could not afford to spend. It only ever made Marcus double down, his cruelty sharpening with her resistance. Her silence had become a form of armor, thin and brittle, but armor nonetheless. She gave the young man a small, tight nod, a gesture of concession that cost her more than he could ever know. "Thank you," she said, her voice a ghost in the echoing hallway. She was turning toward the service entrance, prepared to swallow this final humiliation, when a familiar voice, slick with false charm, slithered down the corridor. "There you are, hiding in the shadows, as usual." Marcus Vance appeared, a vision of tailored success. His tuxedo was perfect, his smile was predatory, and his eyes held the proprietary glint of a man who believes he owns everything he sees, especially her. "I was just about to give my speech. You know, the one about my vision." He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been entirely accurate and was now years out of date. The version that would have flinched. The version that would have wept. "The staffer was just explaining your instructions," Annalise said, her tone level. The cold fury inside her was a block of ice, too dense to shatter. Marcus glanced at the boy, a dismissive flicker of his eyes. "Good. We can't have you making a scene. It's a big night for me." "For us," he added, the word us, a cage he was trying to lock her back inside. He stepped closer, his cologne, the same scent he'd worn the night he'd thrown her laptop against a wall and shattered a year's worth of independent work, invading her space. "You look lovely, by the way, that color. It always did suit you." It was a compliment sharpened into a weapon, a reminder that he had once had the right to know such things, that he believed he still did. "I'm here to collect my portfolio," she stated, not looking at him. She looked at the polished brass handle of the main door. "As we agreed." "Ah, the portfolio." He laughed, a soft, patronizing sound. "Right. Business. Always business with you, Annalise. Don't worry, it's in my office upstairs. We can go up after the party, have a drink, talk." He was lying. The portfolio contained every original drawing, every CAD file, every note that proved the Obsidian Tower was hers. He would never give it back. It was his leverage, his final chain. He reached out, his fingers closing around her upper arm. His grip was not painful. Not yet. It was a gesture of ownership, performed for the benefit of the young staffer still hovering nearby. "Come on, let's not do this here. People are watching." "Let go of my arm, Marcus," she said. The words were quiet, but they were not soft. They were stones dropped into a still pond. His smile tightened. The charm evaporated, revealing the ugly wiring beneath. "Don't be difficult. You have an obligation to be here. To support me, the investors want to see a united front." "That obligation ended when you forged my signature on the partnership dissolution papers," she replied, the truth of it a stark and ugly thing in the pristine hallway. The staffer's eyes widened. Marcus's grip hardened, his fingers digging into the muscle of her arm. The emerald silk wrinkled under the pressure. "You'll regret saying that." His voice was a low hiss. "You have nothing without me. This building, this night, it's all mine. You're just a bitter little footnote. Now, you can either walk through that service door and disappear, or I can have security escort you out. Which will it be?" She did not scream. She did not struggle. She simply stood there, his hand a manacle on her arm, the muffled sound of the party a mockery of the life she should have had, the exhaustion of the past 2 years of fighting a silent, losing battle settled over her like a shroud. This was it, the breaking point, the final, undignified end. And then a new sound cut through the air. It was not loud. It was the subtle, crisp sound of a heavy, bespoke shoe stepping onto the marble from the main hall. It was the barest whisper of expensive wool. A voice, low and calm and carrying the weight of absolute authority, spoke into the sudden, ringing silence of the corridor. "Take your hand off her." It was not a request. It was a statement of fact, a correction of a profound and offensive error in the universe. Marcus froze. Annalise didn't dare to breathe. The young staffer looked as if he'd seen a deity step out of the light. The man who had spoken stood in the archway, framed by the golden light of the gala. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit so perfectly tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. His presence was not loud, it was dense. The kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. He was not handsome in the way Marcus was. Marcus was a billboard. This man was a vault. His face was stark, carved from stillness, and his dark eyes were fixed on Marcus's hand on Annalise's arm. He did not rush. He was not performing. He was simply there. And his being there changed the very air they were breathing. Marcus, for the first time that night, looked uncertain. He squinted, his brain, so accustomed to hierarchies he understood, scrambling to place this man. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" The man in the suit took another unhurried step into the corridor. The light from the gala caught the subtle sheen of his silk tie. He ignored Marcus entirely. His gaze shifted to Annalise, and for the first time in years, she felt seen. Not appraised, not coveted, not dismissed. Seen. His eyes weren't warm, but they were clear. They held a startling recognition. "Are you all right, Miss Thorne?" he asked. His voice was steady as iron wrapped in silk. The use of her name, spoken with such respect in this place of her deepest humiliation, was a small, shocking kindness. She managed a single shaky nod. Marcus, recovering his swagger, tightened his grip again. It was a fatal miscalculation. "Look, pal, this is a private conversation. My fiancé and I were just—" "She is not your fiancé," the man stated, his voice dropping half an octave. The temperature in the corridor seemed to fall with it. "And this is my building. Therefore, this is my corridor, and you are no longer welcome in it." The pronouncement hung in the air, simple, devastating, and final. Marcus's face cycled through a series of emotions: confusion, indignation, dawning horror. "Your building? What are you talking about? I built this tower." The man allowed a beat of silence. It was the most eloquent expression of contempt Annalise had ever witnessed. "You were the project manager for the Vance Hartwell Group, a group my corporation acquired 6 months ago. I am Kang Dae-hyun, and I have been looking forward to meeting the actual architect of the Obsidian Tower." He looked directly at Annalise, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "I was told I would find her here." The name, Kang Dae-hyun, slammed into Marcus with the force of a physical blow. Annalise knew it too. He wasn't just a CEO, he was a myth in the world of global finance and development. A ghost who moved markets, who bought and dismantled corporations with a quiet phone call. He was the ultimate source of the funding for this project, the invisible king at the top of the pyramid. And he was standing in a service hallway, looking at her. Marcus's hand dropped from her arm as if it had been burned. The blood rushed back into her skin, a painful, tingling flood. His face, moments before so flush with arrogant power, had gone a waxy, sickly pale. Mr. Mr. Kang, there's been a misunderstanding. Dae-hyun's attention remained on Annalise. He saw the red marks blooming on her arm, the slight tremor in her hands. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He raised his left hand just slightly, a gesture so small it was nearly invisible. It was not invisible to the two men in dark suits who suddenly materialized from the main hall. They moved with a liquid efficiency without wasted motion. They were not event security. They were something else entirely. Mr. Vance, Dae-hyun said, his voice still unnervingly calm, is having some trouble finding the exit. Please show him. The two men flanked Marcus, who was sputtering, trying to piece together his shattered reality. Wait, no, this is my night. You can't do this. Annalise, tell him. But Annalise was looking at Dae-hyun. She was looking at the man who had corrected the world for her with a few quiet words. One of the security men placed a firm hand on Marcus's shoulder. This way, sir. Get your hands off me! Marcus shrieked, his voice cracking, the performance of power giving way to raw panic. I'll sue you! I'll sue all of you! My lawyers will— Your lawyers now work for me, Dae-hyun said, the statement delivered with the flat finality of a closing ledger. As does your firm. As does the bank that holds the note on your penthouse. You have nothing, Mr. Vance. You are a footnote. He used Marcus's own cruel word, turning it back on him with surgical precision. Marcus made a choked, gurgling sound. The fight went out of him completely. His shoulders slumped. His perfect tuxedo suddenly looked like a costume on a broken mannequin. The two men guided him away, not with brutality, but with an implacable, non-negotiable force. He didn't even look back. The corridor was suddenly, profoundly silent. The only sounds were the distant music and the frantic beating of Annalise's own heart. It was just her, the young staffer who was trying to blend into the wall, and Kang Dae-hyun. He turned his full attention to her. The intensity of his gaze was not aggressive, but it was total. It made her feel as if she were the only person in the world. The front entrance is this way, he said softly, if you would care to join me. He did not offer his arm. He simply waited for her to make a choice, and for the first time in a very, very long time, she felt like she had one. She took a breath, the air tasting clean and new, and walked with him out of the shadows and into the golden light. The entire gala seemed to hold its breath as Kang Dae-hyun, the man who owned the very sky they were standing under, paused at the grand entrance. He turned, not to the assembled power brokers and city elites, but to her. I believe you were promised a speech, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear it over the now hushed orchestra. He gestured toward the stage. The honor should go to the architect. Annalise's mind was a maelstrom of shock and a strange, disorienting relief. I can't. The words were automatic, a reflex born of years of being told to be invisible. Dae-hyun's expression did not change, but his eyes held hers. You can, he stated. It was not encouragement. It was an observation of fact. He saw a capability in her that she had forgotten she possessed. Before she could protest further, his assistant, a woman with sharp eyes and an impossibly calm demeanor, appeared at his side. Mr. Kang, the car is ready. He gave a slight nod, his gaze never leaving Annalise. Change of plans, Miss Han. We will be leaving. Please extend my apologies to the mayor. He then looked back at Annalise. The noise of the gala, the weight of 1,000 curious stares, seemed to fade into a dull background hum. This is not the proper venue for a conversation. Allow me to see you home. Home was a one-bedroom apartment she could barely afford, a place that felt more like a bunker than a sanctuary. It was a place still haunted by the ghosts of Marcus's promises. I can take a cab. I have no doubt that you can, he replied, a hint of something almost like a smile touching the corner of his mouth. But I would prefer that you did not. Your portfolio is still in that man's office. My team is retrieving it now. They will meet us. The effortless way he addressed her deepest anxiety, the casual mention of a team already deployed to solve a problem he had only just learned of, was breathtaking. Power like that was a force of nature. It did not ask. It simply acted. It reshaped reality. She found herself nodding, a silent acquiescence. They walked through the stunned crowd, a path clearing before them as if by magic. Dae-hyun moved with an unhurried grace, his presence creating a bubble of silence around them. They exited the tower not through the front doors crowded with paparazzi, but through a private, unmarked glass door that led to a quiet side street. A sleek black sedan, so dark it seemed to absorb the city lights, was waiting at the curb. The engine was silent. A driver held the door open. The interior of the car was a world unto itself, cool, quiet, and smelling faintly of leather and clean, sterile air. It was the kind of silence that cost a fortune. Annalise slid onto the plush seat, the emerald silk of her dress pooling around her. Dae-hyun followed, settling beside her, and the door closed with a soft, definitive thud, sealing them off from the world. The car pulled away from the curb with a smooth electric hum. The lights of the city slid past the tinted windows, painting fleeting patterns on Dae-hyun's impassive face. For several long minutes, neither of them spoke. Annalise stared at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. The red marks on her arm were fading, but she could still feel the phantom pressure of Marcus's fingers. "He will not bother you again," Dae-hyun said, breaking the silence. His voice, in the close confines of the car, was even deeper, more resonant. Annalise looked up at him. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I have acquired all of his assets and all of his debts," he said simply. "He no longer has the resources to be a nuisance. The company he ran, the credit he lived on, the reputation he traded, they all belong to me now. A man like Marcus Vance does not exist without those things. He will, for all intents and purposes, cease to be." The sheer, brutal simplicity of it was terrifying, and to a part of her she was ashamed to acknowledge, deeply cathartic. He had not threatened Marcus. He had simply erased him from the board. "Why?" she asked, the question raw. "Why would you do all of that?" Dae-hyun turned his head to look at her fully. The passing streetlights illuminated the sharp planes of his face. "Because I do not tolerate thieves," he said, "and I do not abide disrespect toward artists. I reviewed every document related to the Obsidian Tower project when my firm took over. The initial design proposals, the structural engineering reports, the material requisitions. Your signature was on the originals. Your design philosophy was in the notes. His was not. He had seen her, even when she was just a name on a page, a ghost in the machine of her own creation. He had seen her. I saw the first draft of the tower," he continued, his voice quiet, almost reflective. "The one you submitted before Vance Hartwell took the lead. It was ambitious. More glass. A cantilevered observation deck. They forced you to compromise. To make it cheaper, more conventional." She stared at him, speechless. He was talking about a design she had sketched on a napkin 2 years ago, a dream she had assumed was lost forever, buried under layers of corporate-mandated mediocrity. How did you see that?" "My mother is a potter," he said, the unexpected personal detail landing with surprising weight. "She taught me to recognize the hand of the maker. Your hand was all over the good parts of this project. His was in the compromises." He paused. "I have already commissioned a feasibility study for the original cantilevered design. It will be added. Construction begins next month." Annalise felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation behind her eyes. It was not sadness. It was the painful cracking of a dam that had held back hope for too long. To have her work, her true work, not only seen, but understood and championed. It was a validation so profound it left her dizzy. The car slowed, turning onto a quiet, tree-lined street she didn't recognize. It pulled up to a high, unmarked stone wall. A heavy wooden gate slid open silently, revealing a long, gravel driveway that led toward a house that was less a house and more a piece of living sculpture. It was a stunning example of modernism. All clean lines, glass walls, and an organic integration with the surrounding landscape of ancient trees and carefully raked gardens. "This isn't my apartment," she said, her voice barely a whisper. No, Dae-hyun agreed. It is not. Your apartment is being cleared. My security team is ensuring none of Mr. Vance's possessions remain and that there are no unauthorized surveillance devices. They are also delivering your portfolio. It will be safe to return tomorrow. Tonight, you will stay here. He said it with the same calm authority with which he had dismantled Marcus's life. This was not a negotiation. It was the next logical step in his plan. The car stopped. The driver was already opening her door. Dae-hyun got out and stood waiting for her. The air here was different, cooler, smelling of pine and damp earth. Standing before the house, which glowed with a warm internal light, Annalise felt a tremor of fear. This was too much, too fast. She had just escaped one cage. She was terrified of walking into another, no matter how beautifully constructed. Mr. Kang, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I appreciate your help, but I can't accept this. He looked at her, his head tilted slightly. Why not? Because I don't know what you expect in return. The ugly words hung in the clean night air. Her experience with powerful men was that they always expected something. Dae-hyun was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Then he did something that surprised her more than anything else that night. He gave a short, dry, almost imperceptible huff of air. It might have been a laugh. Miss Thorne, he said, his voice laced with a surprising dry wit. I have just spent upwards of $90 million to acquire a second-rate construction firm and the personal debt of a man I despise, primarily to correct an injustice I found aesthetically displeasing. My return was watching the look on his face when he realized he was no longer relevant. He paused, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. I expect nothing from you but that you get a good night's sleep, and that tomorrow you will consider a proposal to build things for me. Things without compromise. He gestured toward the open door of the house, where an older woman with a kind face and silver hair pulled into a neat bun was waiting patiently. My mother, Hae-sun, is visiting. She has made tea. Annalise looked from the imposing figure of Kang Dae-hyun to the warm light of the open door and the gentle-faced woman waiting within. The world had been tilted off its axis tonight, but here, in this quiet, impossible place, she felt the first, tentative glimmer of solid ground beneath her feet. She took a step forward. The week that followed was a study in disorientation. Annalise woke each morning in a guest suite that was larger and more tastefully appointed than her entire apartment. The bed was a cloud, the sheets were impossibly soft, and the floor-to-ceiling window looked out onto a tranquil Zen garden where water trickled over smooth gray stones. It was the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. A silence she had never known. She spent the first 2 days in a state of suspended shock. She explored the house, a masterpiece of architectural harmony. It was not opulent, but every surface, every object, every line was deliberate and of the highest quality. It was a space designed for peace, a physical manifestation of the stillness its owner embodied. Dae-hyun was a ghost in his own home. He would be gone before she woke, and he would return late, long after she had eaten the simple, delicious meals prepared by his silent, efficient housekeeper. They rarely saw each other, yet his presence was everywhere. Her portfolio, the one Marcus had held hostage for a year, appeared on the large oak desk in her room on the first morning. It was intact. Every drawing, every note. Next to it was a new, top-of-the-line laptop and a large-format tablet, the screens blank, waiting. An invitation. His mother, Hae-sun, was her primary companion. She was a woman of quiet, formidable grace. She did not pry or ask questions about what had happened. Instead, she would find Annalise staring out the window and simply sit with her, offering her a cup of fragrant barley tea. A crack in a bowl does not mean it is ruined, Hae-sun said one afternoon, her hands deftly shaping a lump of wet clay on a potter's wheel in her studio. Annalise had wandered in, drawn by the earthy smell. Sometimes the crack is where you pour the gold. it becomes the most beautiful part. She looked at Annalise, her eyes full of a deep, knowing wisdom. You have good hands, strong. You should make something. Annalise thought about the emerald gown, now cleaned and hanging in the wardrobe, a relic from another life. She thought about the red marks on her arm, now completely faded. She thought about the years of shrinking herself to fit into Marcus's world, of sanding down her own edges to avoid causing him friction. She had been enduring, existing in a state of quiet, managed hardship, believing it was the only way to survive. Now, in this strange, serene limbo, she was being offered not just safety, but space. The physical space of the house, the creative space of the empty screens, the emotional space to simply breathe. It was terrifying. On the third day, she opened the new laptop. She found a single folder on the desktop labeled KT Projects. Inside were dozens of subfolders: Seoul Waterfront Restoration, Kyoto Museum of Textiles, Vancouver Geothermal Tower. Each contained geological surveys, zoning laws, budget projections, and a simple, one-line creative brief. A space for reflection. A building that honors the past while looking to the future. A structure that breathes with the mountain. There was no deadline, no list of compromises, just problems waiting for beautiful solutions. For the first time in years, Annalise felt a flicker of the old fire, the pure, joyful impulse to create. She opened a blank design file, her fingers hovering over the tablet. She began to draw. She worked for 3 days straight, fueled by the housekeeper's trays of food and Hai-sun's endless pots of tea. She lost track of time. The house, the garden, the strange circumstances of her arrival. It all faded away. There was only the work. She redesigned the Seoul waterfront, creating a series of terraced parks and public spaces that flowed down to the Han River. She sketched a museum in Kyoto that used traditional Japanese joinery techniques on a massive modern scale. She felt parts of her brain waking up that had been dormant for years. Section. She was so engrossed one evening, sketching a complex support structure on her tablet, that she didn't hear him come in. I see you found the files. Annalise jumped, startled. Dae-hyun was standing in the doorway of her room, which she had converted into a makeshift studio. He was still in his dark blue suit from the office, but he had removed his tie and unbuttoned the top button of his crisp white shirt. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp as they took in the dozens of sketches she had pinned to a large corkboard. Yes, she stammered, feeling suddenly exposed, as if he'd walked in on a private diary. I hope you don't mind. On the contrary, he said, his voice a low rumble. He walked slowly into the room, his gaze sweeping across her work. He did not offer empty praise. He observed. He analyzed. He stopped in front of her design for the Kyoto Museum. The interlocking beams, he said, pointing to a detailed cross-section she had drawn. You've adapted the Kanawatsugi joint. It's a bold choice for a steel frame of this size. Most engineers would say it's impossible. It's not impossible if you use a composite alloy and reinforce the load-bearing columns with post-tensioned cables, she said automatically, the architect in her taking over. It distributes the seismic stress more evenly than a traditional welded frame. It allows the building to move, to flex. He looked from the drawing to her, and a flicker of deep, profound respect entered his eyes. He was not looking at a woman he had saved. He was looking at a brilliant professional, an equal. I will have my engineering team run the models, he said. I suspect you are correct. He then gestured to the tablet in her hands. May I? She hesitated, then handed it to him. He studied her latest sketch for a long moment. You are not afraid of negative space. It was a simple observation, but it struck her as deeply insightful. Marcus had always wanted her to fill every corner, to add more ornamentation, to make everything louder. He was terrified of quiet. Space is what gives form its meaning, she replied softly. He handed the tablet back to her, their fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. A jolt, small but distinct, passed between them. His stillness was not coldness, she was beginning to realize. It was a form of immense, contained energy. I received a call today, he said, his tone shifting back to business, from a law firm representing Mr. Vance. Annalise's blood went cold, the peace of the last few days shattered. What did he want? He is filing a lawsuit, Dae-hyun stated, his expression unchanging, for intellectual property theft. He claims the designs for the Obsidian Tower and all of your previous work belong to him. He is also filing for a restraining order against you, citing emotional distress. It was so audacious, so quintessentially Marcus, that Annalise could only stare at him in disbelief. He was the victim now. Of course he was. He can't, she whispered. That's insane. It is, Dae-hyun agreed. It is also a tactical error, a desperate move by a man with no cards left to play. He believes this will force you into a settlement. He believes you will be frightened back into his orbit. He paused. He is working from a version of you that is no longer accurate. What do we do? She asked, the word we slipping out before she could stop it. We do nothing, Dae-hyun said calmly. My legal team will handle the filings. You will not be deposed. You will not see him. You will not have to speak to him. You will continue to do your work. He looked at the board full of her drawings. This is your response. You will build things so beautiful they will render his name a footnote in your biography. That is how you win. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. Miss Thorne? Annalise, she corrected him, the name feeling solid in her own mouth for the first time. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Annalise, he repeated. My mother tells me you have not been outside the gate since you arrived. I haven't had a reason to. Tomorrow, he said, we are going to see a piece of land. A cliffside property overlooking the ocean. It has been called unbuildable for 50 years. I would like your opinion. It was not a date. It was a challenge, a collaboration. It was an offer of a future, written not in promises, but in blueprints. And as he walked away, leaving her in the quiet glow of her own rediscovered genius, Annalise felt the last of the fear begin to recede, replaced by the steady, thrilling hum of what came next. The next morning, the air was crisp with the scent of salt and eucalyptus. Dae-hyun drove them himself, not in the imposing black sedan, but in a vintage silver Aston Martin that seemed more a piece of kinetic sculpture than a car. He drove with the same focused economy of motion that he did everything else. He did not speak much. He did not need to. The quiet between them was no longer empty. It was comfortable, charged with a shared, unspoken understanding. They arrived at a stretch of coastline so rugged and beautiful it took Annalise's breath away. Jagged cliffs of granite and basalt dropped hundreds of feet to a churning turquoise sea. The wind was a living thing here, sculpting the cypress trees into gnarled, dramatic shapes. This is it, Dae-hyun said, stopping the car near the edge of the precipice. They got out and walked toward the cliff's edge. A faded, weather-beaten for sale sign was tilted at a drunken angle, a testament to decades of failure. Everyone who has tried to build here has wanted to conquer it, Dae-hyun observed, his eyes scanning the horizon. They wanted to blast the rock, level the ground. They saw the land as an obstacle. Annalise walked the perimeter, her architect's eye taking in every contour, every fissure in the rock. The way the light fell at this time of day. She could feel the land, its power, its ancient, stubborn spirit. She did not see an obstacle. She saw a partner. They were wrong, she said, her voice filled with a dawning certainty. You don't conquer this. You work with it. You anchor the foundation deep into the bedrock here, she pointed, and you cantilever the structure out over the cliff face. It shouldn't sit on the land. It should float off of it, a dialogue between the house and the sea. She turned to him, her eyes alight with the fire of creation. She had forgotten the lawsuit. She had forgotten Marcus. She had forgotten everything but the glorious, beautiful problem in front of her. It would be a statement, not of dominance, but of respect. Dae-hyun watched her, his expression one of deep, undisguised admiration. He was not just seeing her talent now, he was seeing her soul. "Draw it for me," he said, his voice a low command. And so she did. Over the next few weeks, the unbuildable cliff house became her obsession. Dae-hyun had a geodesic survey dome erected on the site, a climate-controlled bubble where she could work, surrounded by the very landscape she was designing for. She spent her days there, sketching, modeling, and dreaming in glass and steel. He would often appear in the late afternoon, bringing her coffee, and they would sit in silence for an hour, watching the sun set over the ocean, the unspoken conversation flowing between them. He never touched her, not even a casual brush of the hand, but his presence was a constant, steadying force. It was a new kind of intimacy, one based not on passion but on recognition. He saw the most competent, most essential part of her, and he valued it above all else. In his quiet, observant way, he was giving her back to herself. Meanwhile, in the sterile glass and chrome world that Marcus Vance still desperately clung to, delusion was setting in. He sat in his lawyer's office, a space he could no longer truly afford, radiating an aggrieved arrogance. "Give her 3 more days," Marcus said, pacing the expensive rug. "The pressure of the lawsuit will crack her. She's fragile, always has been. She'll come crawling back, begging me to make it all go away." His lawyer, a man named Peterson who was sweating through his suit, looked grim. "Mr. Vance? Marcus. Kang's legal team responded this morning. They haven't filed a motion to dismiss. They've filed a countersuit." "A countersuit for what?" Marcus scoffed. "She has nothing. For corporate espionage, fraud, and copyright infringement on behalf of his corporation, which, as you know, now owns the rights to all Vance Hartwell projects," Peterson read from a document, his voice flat. "They are also petitioning to have your architectural license permanently revoked based on evidence of professional misconduct." He looked up. "They attached a sworn affidavit from your former partner, Hartwell, detailing the forgery of the partnership dissolution papers." Marcus stopped pacing. The color drained from his face. "Hartwell, that old fool, he wouldn't dare." "They also attached your personal bank statements showing a direct transfer of funds from the corporate account to your private account on the same day the fraudulent papers were filed," Peterson continued, his voice monotone. "And they included security footage from your office building, the night you destroyed Miss Thorne's laptop." Marcus sank into a chair, his bravado crumbling like dry plaster. He had not just been outmaneuvered, he had been dissected. Every lie, every petty crime, every shortcut he had ever taken had been cataloged, documented, and was now being used as a weapon against him. Kang Dae-hyun did not just fight, he vivisected, but arrogance is a difficult disease to cure. In his panic, Marcus found one last desperate straw to grasp. The Obsidian Gala had been a disaster because he was on unfamiliar ground. He needed to confront them in a place where he held the power, or where he thought he did. "The annual shareholders' meeting for the development board," Marcus said, a manic gleam in his eye. "It's next week. Kang will be there. He has to be. He's the new majority owner. I still have a seat on that board, Peterson. A minor one, but I have a seat. He can't take that from me, not before the meeting." "Marcus, what are you going to do?" Peterson asked, alarmed. "I'm going to appeal to them directly," Marcus said, his confidence delusionally rebuilding itself. "To my peers. They know me. They respect me. I'll expose him for what he is, a corporate raider. And her, a vindictive ex-lover trying to ruin me. I'll show them the restraining order I filed. I'll play the victim. They'll see. They'll all see." He was a man about to walk into a hurricane, armed with a paper umbrella, convinced he could command the wind. He was working from a version of the world that had never been accurate, and it was about to be his undoing. The ballroom of the Saint. Regis was a sea of dark suits and quiet, immense power. This was not a gala. It was a gathering of the titans who owned the city's skyline. The air was thick with the scent of money and influence. Annalise stood beside Dae-hyun, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She wore an architecturally precise dress of midnight blue, a color that spoke of quiet confidence. She was not hiding. She was present. Her cliffside house design had been unanimously approved by Dae-hyun's board that morning. He had introduced her not as his guest, but as the lead architect for Kang Thompson's new North American residential division. He had given her a title. He had given her a kingdom. They were speaking with the deputy mayor when a disturbance near the entrance drew their attention. It was Marcus. He looked terrible. His suit was slightly rumpled, his face was pale and slick with sweat, and his eyes had a wild, cornered look. He had bypassed security by using his board member credentials, a final act of privilege he was about to exhaust. He strode into the center of the room, his movements jerky and unnatural. "I need everyone's attention," he shouted, his voice too loud, too raw for the refined space. A shocked silence fell over the room. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. All eyes turned to him. Annalise felt a cold dread wash over her, an old, familiar fear. Dae-hyun's hand came up and rested gently on hers, a small, solid point of warmth on her arm. It was not a gesture of restraint. It was a gesture of support. "I am here," it said. "You are safe." Marcus's eyes found them, locking onto Annalise. "There!" he yelled, pointing a trembling finger. "That woman, Annalise Thorne, she and her lover, Kang Dae-hyun, are trying to ruin me." He was performing, playing the wronged man for an audience of his peers. It was a desperate, pathetic play, and the audience was not buying it. They looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. "He used his money to steal my company, to steal my life's work," Marcus raved, his voice cracking. "And she has a legal obligation to me. I have the papers. We were partners. She owes me everything." He started moving toward them, his eyes fixed on Annalise with a terrifying, obsessive light. "Annalise, you tell them what you owe me." He was 10 feet away when Dae-hyun stepped slightly in front of her, a subtle, protective shift. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. "Sit down, Marcus," he said, his voice a quiet command that cut through the room like a shard of ice. Marcus faltered, but his desperation was too great. "No, I won't be silenced. I have a right to be here. I have a right to—" "Your rights expired approximately 5 minutes ago," Dae-hyun said, his tone conversational. He lifted his phone, the screen glowing. He did not look at Marcus. He addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for the interruption. It seems a former board member was not aware of a recent transaction." He tilted the phone so the assembled power brokers could see. On the screen was a signed and executed transfer of ownership document. "As of 8:32 this morning," Dae-hyun announced, his voice calm and clear, "I concluded the acquisition of the final 1.2% of shares in the development board held by minority partners. One of those partners was Mr. Vance. His seat on this board, along with the shares themselves, was collateral against a personal loan he defaulted on 3 days ago. He is now trespassing." The collective intake of breath in the room was audible. It was not just a corporate takeover. It was a public execution, performed with the cold precision of a surgeon. Marcus stared at the phone, his mind refusing to process the information. The foundation of his last desperate stand had just turned to sand beneath his feet. No, that's not possible. "Furthermore," Dae-hyun continued, swiping to another document on his phone, "the State Licensing Board, after reviewing evidence of sustained professional fraud, voted this morning to permanently revoke Mr. Vance's architectural license, and the district attorney's office has just unsealed an indictment against him on multiple counts of forgery and embezzlement." Dae-hyun finally lowered the phone and looked at Marcus. There was no triumph in his eyes, no anger, only a quiet, final finality. "You are not a victim, Marcus. You are a thief who has been caught. You are not a visionary. You are a footnote. And your story is over." The words, so similar to the ones Marcus had used to wound her, landed with devastating force. Marcus's face crumpled. The last vestiges of his arrogance, his pride, his entire constructed identity dissolved in an instant. He made a choked, sobbing sound and his legs gave out. He dropped to his knees in the center of the silent, stunned room, a broken man in a rumpled suit. He did not beg. He did not speak. He just knelt there, weeping, the sound unnervingly loud in the cavernous space. Dae-hyun gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The same two men from the gala materialized, their movements swift and silent. They gently, firmly lifted Marcus to his feet and escorted him from the room, his sobs echoing behind him until the doors swung shut, leaving behind a profound and absolute silence. The ruin was complete. Dae-hyun turned back to the room. He looked at the shocked faces of the most powerful people in the city, and then he looked at Annalise. He reached out and took her hand, drawing her forward to stand beside him, not behind him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice ringing with a quiet, unshakable authority, "allow me to reintroduce you to the woman whose vision you have all admired from your office windows, the mind that imagined the Obsidian Tower, and the talent that will be shaping our city's future for years to come." He squeezed her hand gently. "This is Annalise Thorne, the finest architect I have ever had the privilege of knowing." In the ensuing silence, a single person began to clap. It was the deputy mayor. Then another joined, and another, until the entire room erupted in a wave of applause. It was not for him. It was for her. It was a sound of recognition, of validation, of a truth finally brought into the light. Annalise looked at Dae-hyun, at the man who had not saved her, but had cleared the path for her to save herself. His dark eyes were fixed on her, and in their depths she saw something she had never seen before, a warm, quiet, and deeply profound pride. A real smile, the first in years, reached her eyes. She felt a slow, deep exhale release a weight she hadn't even realized she was still carrying. The noise of the applause faded, the room full of powerful people blurred at the edges, and for a moment there was only the two of them, standing together in the light. The feeling was not triumph. It was peace, the profound, bone-deep peace of being correctly placed in the world, of finally being home. They left the ballroom not long after, slipping away while the conversations were starting to resume, a low buzz of speculation and awe filling the space they vacated. They didn't speak as they walked the long, carpeted hallway to the private elevator. The silence between them was full, not of unspoken words, but of a shared understanding that ran deeper than language. His hand was still loosely holding hers, his thumb stroking the back of her hand in a slow, steady rhythm. It was a gesture of quiet possession, but not of ownership. It was the way one holds something precious, something one has chosen to protect. Inside the elevator, as it descended in a smooth, silent drop, Annalise looked at their reflection in the polished brass walls, a man in a perfect dark suit and a woman in a midnight blue dress. They looked like they belonged together. They looked like a partnership. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft in the enclosed space. He turned his head to look at her, his expression serious. "For what?" "For seeing me," she replied, "when I had forgotten how to see myself." "I saw an artist being silenced," he said, his voice a low timbre that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "My mother taught me that is the greatest sin. Beauty should not be caged." He paused, his gaze intense. "I did nothing, Annalise. I simply opened the door. You were the one who had the courage to walk through it." The elevator doors opened to the private garage. The silver Aston Martin waited, a sleek promise of escape. He led her to the car, opening the passenger door for her before walking around to the driver's side. As he slid into the seat beside her, the scent of his cologne, a subtle, clean fragrance of sandalwood and bergamot, filled the small space. It was the scent of safety. Instead of starting the car, he turned in his seat to face her. "The lawsuit will be formally dropped in the morning," he said. "The countersuit as well. It has served its purpose. His license is gone. His reputation is gone. He has no path back into this world. He will fade." "And the charges?" she asked, needing to know all the endings. "His lawyers, my lawyers now, will advise him to plead guilty. He will receive a suspended sentence and a significant fine, which my corporation will pay from his liquidated assets. He will not see the inside of a prison. He will see the inside of a small rented apartment with no credit and no prospects. For a man like Marcus, that is a far greater punishment. It was a cold, precise, and devastatingly fitting end. Dae-hyun had not destroyed him with rage, but with logic. He had simply balanced the books. What now? Annalise asked, the question hanging in the quiet air. It was a question about more than just the next hour or the next day. It was about the shape of the life that stretched before her. Now, Dae-hyun said, a rare, soft smile gracing his lips. We go home, and tomorrow we begin building a house on a cliff. He started the car, the engine a low, powerful purr. They drove out of the city, leaving the glittering towers and the noise and the ghosts behind. They drove toward the coast, toward the scent of salt and the sound of the ocean. The house was lit as they arrived, a warm beacon against the dark silhouette of the trees. Hae-sun had left the porch light on for them. As they walked up the stone path, Annalise felt the last of the tension in her shoulders finally release. This was not a temporary sanctuary anymore. This was the beginning. Inside, the house was quiet. A single lamp was lit in the living room, casting a soft glow on the clean lines of the furniture and the dark shapes of the paintings on the wall. A tray with a teapot and 2 cups sat on the low table. Dae-hyun shed his suit jacket, tossing it carelessly over the back of a chair. It was the first time she had ever seen him do anything carelessly. He rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt, revealing strong forearms and a complex, beautiful watch. He looked less like a CEO and more like a man at ease in his own home. He poured the tea, which was still warm, and handed her a cup. She took it, her fingers wrapping around the smooth, warm ceramic. They sat on the sofa, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. I don't leave because things become complicated, she said suddenly, looking into her teacup. It was something she needed him to know. I didn't leave Marcus because he was difficult. I stayed through all of that. I left when I realized he didn't respect the work. He didn't respect me. He just wanted to own the thing that made it. Dae-hyun was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. I know, he said finally. That is why I never asked you to stay. I simply made it a place you might choose to be. Their eyes met over the rims of their teacups. The slow burn, the quiet recognition, the respectful distance. It had all led to this moment of profound, simple clarity. This was not a romance born of breathless passion, but something stronger, more durable. It was a partnership forged in mutual admiration, built on a foundation of shared values. It was a home built on bedrock. The Cliff House, she said, changing the subject, but not really. The plans are almost finished. There's just one thing I haven't been able to solve. What is that? He asked, his curiosity piqued. The master bedroom, she confessed. It's designed for 2 people, a partnership, but the 2 halves are identical. I couldn't figure out which side was yours and which was mine. Dae-hyun set his cup down on the table. He looked at her, his dark eyes holding an emotion she couldn't quite name, but it made her heart beat a little faster. It was warm, and it was deep, and it was utterly sincere. That, he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur, is a problem I believe we can solve together. He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the sofa. His touch was warm and firm and sure. It was not a demand, it was a promise. A promise of shared sunrises over the ocean, of quiet evenings spent in comfortable silence, of blueprints and beautiful things yet to be built. Looking at his hand on hers, Annalise Thorne, the architect, the survivor, the woman who had been a footnote and was now the entire story, felt the last piece of her new life click perfectly into place. It was not a happily ever after. It was something far more real and far more beautiful. It was a beginning. A solid, true, and magnificent beginning.